Okay, you are ready? You may proceed.
Honorable Speaker, Madam Speaker, education in this country under the Basic Education Act is mandatory and compulsory.
Before you debate, I'll ask you to move. You move it as it is in the order paper. This is your motion.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move the motion. To outlaw discriminatory practices in learning institutions that impede access to basic education. Honorable Speaker, aware that Article 53(1)(b) of the Constitution guarantees every child the right to free and compulsory basic education, and Article 21(2) obligates the state to take legislative and policy measures to ensure the progressive realization of socio-economic rights, which include the right to education under Article 43(1)(f). Further aware that the Basic Education Act, Cap 211, obligates the state and school administrators to ensure equitable access, retention, and completion in basic education, and prohibits administrative barriers that exclude learners. Noting that the Children Act, Cap 141, requires the best interest of the child to be the primary consideration in actions concerning children, including in education. Recognizing that Kenya's international and regional obligations under Article 2 and 28 of the United Nations Convention to the Rights of the Child, Article 13 of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, and the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO Convention against discrimination in education, which requires states to ensure education is accessible, non-discriminatory, and free from economic and social barriers. Concerned that certain designated outlets, that certain administrative practices in schools, particularly compulsory sourcing of uniforms from designated outlets, exclusion of learners for inability to pay school feeding programs, remedial class charges, all other non-statutory levies have the effect of imposing economic and administrative barriers, and in some instances, creating possible avenues for abuse of office and improper financial benefit. Now, therefore, this House resolves that, 1, all basic education institutions shall allow purchase of school uniforms from the open market, as long as they generally conform to the school design and standards, and further, that any attempt to monopolize, control, or otherwise influence the supply of uniforms is unlawful. 2, all learners shall have uninterrupted access to school regardless of inability to pay for school feeding programs, remedial charges, development levies, or any other charges not expressly provided for under the Basic Education Act or any other regulation approved by the Cabinet Secretary responsible for education. 3, the Cabinet Secretary for Education, in consultation with the Teachers Service Commission, shall within 90 days develop a comprehensive regulatory and enforcement framework, including a monitoring mechanisms, a complaints and redress system for parents and learners, as well as a nationwide public awareness program to ensure full compliance. And 3 and 4, provide that any person or institution, action or policy that violates this resolution shall be subject to disciplinary action under the relevant statutes, including the Teachers Service Commission Act, the Basic Education Act, the Children's Act, and the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission Act. Madam Speaker, emanating from the foregoing, it is clear that both our Constitution and our nation's commitments under international treaties, the Children's Act, and the Basic Education Act, every Kenyan child has the right, and it is not just the right, it is also compulsory for a child to attend school uninterrupted. This is the right of every Kenyan child, irrespective of the ability or the inability of economic ability or inability of their parents. Honorable Speaker, child. Madam Speaker, how can a tailor who makes uniforms, who makes clothes for other people, not be good enough to make a uniform for their own child in this country? Madam Speaker, it is these barriers that I seek to have removed. Madam Speaker, a parent who cannot afford a meal for their child, why should that child be punished by being excluded from class and from school? Feeding programs are supposed to be compassionate. They cannot be punishment. They cannot be a source of exclusion. They cannot be a source of discrimination. Yet we want to produce a just society, and a society that is giving the lowest child in this country an opportunity to thrive. Education is the only equalizer for our children. How do we confine some children to a lack of education? Because they come from the slums of Wetemere in Nyeri town, because they come from Korogosho, because they come from Kibera, because they come from Mukuru kwa Jenga, because they come from Nyalenda. How can we? And Gashororo in Juja thicker and thicker. Madam Speaker, these issues, we must bring them to an end. And this has nothing to do with the political persuasion or the political party or the political inclination of the different members of this House. It is the welfare of the Kenyan child. And therefore, Madam Speaker, I want to beg my colleagues that we have had these conversations in this House for too long. We bring the CS for education here. He stands and says that this is the position of the ministry. But, Madam Speaker, this week, our children are going back to school for second term. There are children, unfortunately, who will be sent back by school principals because their uniform apparently has faded, because apparently the parent has not paid money for lunch. They report in the morning, lunch is 6 hours later, but the child is sent home at 8 o'clock in the morning, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to plead with this House that it is time for us to speak for the Kenyan child. Madam Speaker, I want to plead with my colleagues that learning in our schools is supposed to happen between 8 o'clock and 5 o'clock or 4:30. The curriculum, if it cannot be covered within the normal learning hours, let us reduce the workload so that we can eliminate the practice of remedial lessons. A child is sent home because their parent could not pay remedial lesson. They stay home for a week. The remedial lessons are offered. Eventually, the parent has to pay the entire fees. This child is not offered, given an opportunity to be taught for the remedial lessons that were covered. A child is sent home on account of lunch feeding program, stays home for 2 weeks. When eventually the parent pays, the child comes back. They do not consume the food for the 2 weeks they were out of school. These practices, Madam Speaker, burden my heart. They disturb my conscience. And therefore, honorable members, today I request you that we stand for that parent who today woke up in the morning, went to look for kibarua in a construction site, but they did not get, but their child deserves to access education uninterrupted. Madam Speaker, I want to speak for the mamafua who woke up in this morning, went around our residences, did not get a job, but their child deserves an education. I want to speak for the border rider, Madam Speaker, who since morning, on account of the rain in Nairobi, has not been able to carry one passenger, yet their child deserves an education. Madam Speaker, I want to speak for the children of Kitui, where there has been conflict and there has been death. The livelihoods of in their rural community has been disrupted. Their children still need education. I want to speak for the child of the pastoralists whose animals were stolen last night. The entire income of that household taken away because of cattle rustlers. But their children still deserve an education. Madam Speaker, I want to speak for the border rider who had an accident last evening. Their border is no longer on the road. They are confined to a hospital bed, yet their children deserve an education. Madam Speaker, the examples are endless. Madam Speaker, I want to speak for the parents who have cancer, confined to hospital beds. They can no longer actively go to gainful employment, but their children deserve an education. Madam Speaker, these examples are heart-wrenching. It is time that this House started passing legislation and regulations that not only impose punishment on the ordinary people, but they go right into the center of the realization of the rights that we have given to our people, to our children, in the Constitution, in our international commitments, and other statutes. Madam Speaker, I had long nights wondering whether we should abolish uniforms. Yes. But the uniform, when we look at our life in Nyeri town, illicit brews are being sold and manufactured in Nyeri town center.
Who is shouting there? Member for Kisumu. I think you wait for your time. I heard a loud yes. So you are the one who is out of order. You're out of order. I'll give you a chance to speak.
So, Madam Speaker, I realized that the uniform is a tool also for protecting our children. Today, we have young children being subjected to GBV, including rape and murder. Yet they are in uniforms. Suppose they weren't. And on account of that, Madam Speaker, I was convinced beyond doubt that the uniform remains to be an important tool in our society and in the education and in the protection of our children. The question, therefore, is how to ensure it does not become a barrier. A good thing does not have negative and intended consequences that result in discrimination, in disenfranchisement, and designing our children into the cycle of poverty, looking at the backgrounds from where they come from. Madam Speaker, allow me to request the Honorable Koibori, MP Juja, to second.
Member for Juja, Honorable Koimburi.